My name is Alex Dworjan. I'm an Ansible specialist, and I'm going to be walking through using Event-Driven Ansible with Dynatrace. So what's the reason why I'd want to run Ansible and Dynatrace together? So before I even get into the Event-Driven Ansible side of the house, this can ease your process of installing and configuring the Dynatrace One agent across all of your different hosts. So there's already a role that exists, so it takes care of the fact of where I'm downloading packages from, where the configurations themselves live, how I actually do the installation. All of that's handled by that role. So it makes it much easier to get started as I try to deploy the agent across your entire infrastructure. Switching to the event-driven Ansible side of the house, the Red Hat Ansible connector is part of Dynatrace Hub, so I'm not installing it from anywhere unusual, and it can integrate using event streams. So especially if you have multiple teams that are leveraging Dynatrace and they might want their own rulebook activations and rulebooks, I can have them all connect to the same event stream that is set up once in Dynatrace. I can also technically only leverage one Dynatrace workflow. So depending on how you set up that workflow, I could have it take every single problem that comes in and just send that event payload directly to event-driven Ansible. You could certainly add in filters if you don't want to send every payload, but it does give you the option to just send everything. And then I have event-driven Ansible with the rules, only handle rules that you actually want to run automation against, whether it's gathering logs, actually running the full remediation, depending on exactly where you're at in your automation journey. From the rulebook side of the house, I can call any existing job template or workflow job template, so I can do that remediation, update things like ServiceNow, send messages to Slack or Teams, all of that within that single remediation or single response. So from an architecture perspective, really all of this can be run through the automation platform. So that initial agent install and setup, that information will get sent from that agent directly to your Dynatrace instance. Obviously, that's part of the configuration to make sure you have the appropriate location as well as key. Inside Dynatrace itself, I'll set up that Ansible connector to send a webhook to my event-driven Ansible instance or to the event stream that I've set up. Within the event stream, I'll have a rulebook activation attached to it, and the rulebook will trigger some sort of job or workflow template that can actually then do the remediation, which could include things like gathering logs from the Linux or Windows device. It could be actually doing remediation, maybe adding some vCPUs, maybe it's just restarting a web application. And as part of that process, maybe I do want to notify personnel, so updating things like Mattermost or Slack, and making sure my incident system is maintained up to date, so either creating or updating ServiceNow tickets as I go through this process. From the rulebook perspective, this is again a fairly simple rulebook. I am leveraging the webhook source. It really doesn't matter because I'm going to leverage an event stream and that payload is going to get stripped out. But this shows I don't need a custom rulebook or a custom decision environment for this to work. I can just leverage the base decision environment. And then for my rule itself, I'm specifically listening for one event, in this case, CPU saturation. And I'm going to run a workflow that I already have called automated response high CPU EDA. I only want this to run across a single host. I don't want to add in, 2 cores across every single virtual machine in my environment. Not a great idea. So I am passing in that virtual machine name so I can make sure I only update this on a single host. So let's dive into a demonstration so we can see how this might work in reality and how you go through that setup. I'm going to start the demonstration in the automation platform since Dynatrace is going to need to connect to an event stream, which means I need an event stream created. In order to create an event stream, I need a credential created. So I'm going to go into automation decisions, infrastructure credentials, and I'm going to create a new credential. Call this new Dynatrace token because I already have an existing Dynatrace token. For organization, you can pick whatever organization you want to own that credential. And then for credential type, while there is a Dynatrace event stream credential, that is a username and password. I specifically want to use a token, so I'm going to do the token event stream. The automation platform nor Dynatrace actually creates the token. So you can auto-generate a token, come up with some random token yourself, or you can use something like Bitwarden to generate the token for you. So I'm just going to use that generated token and paste that in here. I'm going to keep that saved because I will need that in Dynatrace when I set up that connection in a minute. And then I'm going to go to event streams now that the credential exists, and I'm going to create a new event stream. Again, I'm not going to pick the Dynatrace event stream. I'm going to do the token event stream, pick that credential I just created, and I'm going to disable forwarding events. The reason why I want to do this is when I actually run any sort of problem from Dynatrace, it will send the payload here and I'll be able to do that debug without having a rulebook already created. So it just saves me the amount of time in trying to create these things. I don't need a debug statement. I can just look here and see exactly what the payload is. This will also help me know if for some reason the authentication isn't set up properly between the two. I'll see an error on this particular page. So it does specifically say it's disabled, and I will see events here when they come through. I'll also need this URL in a minute, but let's jump into Dynatrace to get this set up. So inside Dynatrace, I do want to actually go to the Dynatrace hub, and I'm just going to search for Ansible, and this will be that Red Hat Ansible connector that I talked about before. I've already got it installed to make this process easier. Then I can just click Set Up from here after it's installed to set up that particular connection. I'm not going to use Automation Controller. I'm specifically using Event-Driven Ansible in this case. I've already got a few created, but to create a new one, just click plus on the connection. And the nice part is they've added this in that Dynatrace blocks outgoing traffic by default. So if you click this Manage External Requests, it'll open up another page. And in here, you can either disable the allow list or put in your host pattern for your gateway or event-driven Ansible server, so I can actually reach outbound to that particular host. So important piece. It's a very helpful note as you're going through this process. For connection name, I can just, again, stream. I do specifically want to use event stream because that's what I have set up here. This essentially verifies the payload that's sent in the correct URL. Doesn't try to add /endpoint to the end. I do want to use an access token. I'm going to paste that access token that I had before. Then I can go back in here and just copy this URL and then paste that in here. And it must not contain a trailing slash. So if you do get that error message, just go to the very end and just delete the trailing slash. Done. So now I've got the event stream set up. As I said, I've already verified that my particular host is in that outbound connection. So now all I really need to do is actually set up a workflow. So if I go into the workflows, I can check my permissions. So for mine, I actually made this as simple as possible where I've only set up the primary permissions. I have 0 secondary permissions set up for this because I'm not doing any additional queries. I'm just taking the actual problem itself and sending that event directly to Event-Driven Ansible. So trying to keep this as simple as possible as far as permissions go. So if I create a new workflow, the trigger itself, I'm going to use a Davis problem trigger because that's what I want to trigger off of. I want it to be active. This is where you can pick whatever event categories that you want. So I'll do availability, error, and resource. You can enter any additional keys or custom queries. So I'm going to copy and paste from a separate screen, but I'll walk through kind of what I'm setting here. So if you notice, I'm making sure that the particular device isn't under maintenance because I don't want to run any sort of remediation if that's the case. I only want this to run when it's actually been created. I want to make sure that there is some affected entity ID. And then I've added some additional entity tags because I've got multiple people sharing this environment. But this is what I've got set up to actually do my Davis problem trigger. Really, the only other piece that I need is send a task to Event-Driven Ansible. So I can pick that connection. Conveniently enough, it already picked what I want. And then I just need to send the actual event. And that's it. So this is all I need to set up. I can then save this and run this. Because I already have one up and running, I'm not going to save this. I'm not going to have this be live. So I'm going to exit. But you'll see I already have this set up with that same problem trigger using my existing rulebook activation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger on my Dynatrace host that has one agent running, and conveniently enough, it's already set up. But what's going to happen is I'm going to get this problem coming in here, and then I'll be able to see the exact payload inside that event stream. So because I do not have event stream forwarding set up, it's just going to send the exact payload directly to the event stream, so I can use that to build out my particular rulebook based on what's going on. So it may just take a couple seconds to actually trigger, based on how often Dynatrace is checking, and the usual aspects of it's got to be down X number of times across X number of minutes to trigger. But once this does trigger, I'll be able to see the specific payload inside the event stream, which will help me build out my rulebook activation and my rulebook, because I'll know exactly what that payload looks like as I go through this process. And there we go, it triggered. So minimum process count not met. As I mentioned, I already had another event stream previously created. So if obviously this one didn't get an event received, but my old Dynatrace one, which also does not have forwarding enabled, if I go into this, I will see that the last event was received, and I can see the headers as well as the body itself. So event.payload.event data is going to have all my information. I can see this to get the affected entity IDs, the group ID. I can see the event description. All of this is available here, so I can know exactly what's going on. So if I know, hey, I want to trigger off of any of these various pieces of data, I can. So this, again, gives me more information about the ID, the fact that it was in a created status, the host name, which is obviously very important for me, as well as the event name. So this is what I can use for the rule itself. So if I go into the rulebook that I've created, as you can see, I've got one for event.payload.event data, event.name, minimum process count not met for rule HTTPD host monitor, which perfectly matches this. And then I know host name, I can tell this is a list. So I want item 0 of this list. So again, host.name, item 0 of that list will give me the VM name. So without ever actually having a rulebook activation, doing any sort of debug statements, I can take this payload and I'm off and running. So once I take that information to actually build out a rulebook, I then just need to create a rulebook activation. So, call it Dynatrace, new, assign it to an organization once again, pick from a project that I previously created. If you haven't created a project before, just go into the project screen, create a new project, and then obviously point to a source control repository, which in my case is just a GitHub URL. Do make sure that your rulebooks are in a rulebooks folder within that repository, so they cannot be directly in the root. So if you, for some reason, can't get access to the rulebooks after you do it, make sure they're in a rulebooks folder off the root of your project, and then it will sync. Once that's done, I can come in here, pick from that project, and I can pick from my Dynatrace rulebooks, and then I'll want to select event stream. So I'm going to use the previous one that I created called Dynatrace and click save. I'm going to want to assign credentials since I want to be able to launch automation platform jobs. I'm going to pick that credential, and then you really can pick any decision environment that you want since I'm just using the event stream capability, but I'll pick my decision environment, and then that's it. I can just click create rulebook activation and I'm off and running. You will want to make sure after you do that, again, I've already got a Dynatrace rulebook and rulebook activation running. Make sure that you go to your event stream and enable forwarding for that particular rulebook activation. Then you're all set. So now that I've got this built out end to end, I've got my rulebook pointing out to a workflow, both for web app down and high CPU issues. I have no existing problems. I'm going to trigger, once again, the rulebook. So I'm going to stop, in this case, Apache once again, and I'll wait as it goes through the process of actually being triggered based on, again, how long Dynatrace takes to observe the issue and detect that it's been down for a certain number of time. And then that will send directly to Event-Driven Ansible. So as you can see, I'm at 13 events received right now, the last one at 140, so it'll be easy to track when a new one comes in. Then this will kick off automation, which for me will do a few things. It's going to create a ServiceNow ticket specifically for that host. It is going to remediate the issue. So it's actually going to restart Apache and verify that it's back up and running. And then it's going to notify some personnel in Mattermost, which is my chat program. So you can see it is now active. I can see it's updated to 151 and 14. So by now, if I go to automation controller and go to jobs, I'll see that a workflow has kicked off that's specifically doing that remediation, and it's already closing it out. But what this workflow itself is doing, it's creating a ServiceNow ticket. If that always happens regardless of the ticket, I want to restart that web app and verify that it's up. So I just have a URI command verifying that I get a payload back. I do want to notify personnel in my chat. If it's successful, close out the ticket. If not, update the ServiceNow ticket and, mattermost, that human intervention is required. And again, notify my chat if things are successful, that everything is handled. So I can go into Mattermost and I can see, yep, alert was created at 1:51, that it's been detected on a particular host, and the instance already been closed out. If I go into ServiceNow, I can see that the ticket's been created, impact urgency priority, for specific hosts with an IP address and description. It's already been closed out, and I've added in work notes to close it out properly. So this can be a full end-to-end. While yes, I had a pretty complex workflow to do this, your first iteration can just be gather some logs and throw that into a ServiceNow ticket and then expand from there. So where can you go from here? So I'm going to include several links in the description down below. First one's going to be a output of the Dynatrace workflow that I walked through. So it's going to have that Davis problem alert, as well as just the simple hook with the event to my event-driven Ansible. I'm also going to include that event-driven Ansible rulebook, so you can see just a basic setup with the 2 rules that I have. If you don't want to use the Ansible collection for any reason, I'm going to include the docs for the Dynatrace one agent install, as well as the actual link to the collection. So if you do want to leverage that to set up the one agent across multiple OSs, you'll have that access to that. I'm going to include that Red Hat Ansible connector for workflows. That's going to be directly from the Dynatrace hub. And then the actual docs that walk through that connector setup if you have any additional questions outside of what I set up. But make sure, again, you want to leverage event streams, and you really do want to make sure that that outbound connection is set up for your host. Otherwise, Dynatrace will not send anything outbound to your automation platform. Thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about Dynatrace and Event-Driven Ansible together. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of how you can get started automating some of your responses and problems from Dynatrace. Click my picture on the right to subscribe, or click the image on the left to watch another video.